So I'm going to take Professor Bloom's bio now, after which she would make her presentation. Professor Ruttkamp-Bloem is a philosopher of science and technology, an AI ethics policy advisor, and a machine ethics researcher. Emma is a member of the United Nations Secretary General's AI advisory body. She's the chairperson of the UNESCO World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology. Currently, she's the head of the Department of Philosophy, University of Pretoria, and leads the AI ethics group at the South African Center for AI Research. Emma led the UNESCO ad hoc expert group that prepared a draft of the 2021 UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI and contributed to development of its implementation instruments. She's a member of the Global Academic Network, Center for AI and Digital Policy, Washington, D.C., and has worked in projects related to AI ethics with the African Union Development Agency and the African Commission on the Human and People's Rights. She's a member of various international AI ethics advisory boards, ranging from academia, the intergovernmental sector, to the private sector. She's an associate editor for the Journal of Science and Engineering and a member of the editorial board of the Journal of AI Law and Regulation and the Cambridge Forum on AI, Law and Regulation. Please join me to welcome Professor Emma for her presentation. Thank you. Professor Emma, please.
Thank you so much, Titilolo. I didn't think that you would read all of that. I will, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so impressed with this course. I so wish that we can pull something like this off. Hopefully, you know, we can follow your example. I'm going to share my screen quickly, and I hope that it will work. And I just want to, okay. So, let's see if I can make it move. Yeah. Okay. So, well, thank you for joining me. I'm going to talk to you about the role of AI ethics, but what I'm going to do is to discuss AI ethics actually in the context of AI ethics being a politics of AI. Because if we look at what you've done already, and I'm really, as I said, very impressed, you have looked at controversies and biases. You know that there is this problem of bias in the use of AI. You know what generative AI is. You know how it works. I don't have to tell you anything about that anymore. And then you've looked at bias and what kind of role it plays in terms of academic integrity. You've looked at privacy, transparency, accountability, inclusion, in terms of bias, and then you had the legal and social and technological and pedagogical issues to consider in the use of AI, and you did the case studies, and finally you are now in your final week, where I want to talk to you a little bit more about why it is necessary for us to think about what it means to talk about responsible engagement with AI in general, but then also specifically in education. And as I said, I want to focus a lot in this talk on the societal impact and on ethics as a politics of AI. So I'm going to say a few words about AI ethics. I'm actually just going to note a few of its principles, which you have already discussed many. And then I'm going to go into this question of why should we care? I'll say something about the AI business model. I'll say something about algorithmic colonization, also called data colonization or AI colonization. I'll talk about the technopolitics of AI, data poverty, cultural similarity, and then language and knowledge. I mean, what is it that generative AI applications generate? It can't be knowledge because it's not peer-reviewed, it's not been empirically tested. What is it? And what does it mean for us? And then I'll try to have some kind of a response to all these issues that we should be caring about. And I'll end with some suggestions for an African AI business model. And then it's over to you. So general AI ethics concerns usually include these ones. So obviously there is this intent to prevent harm, and this often goes hand in hand with the proportionality principle that AI technology is not viewed as, you know, the or solution for every single thing, but that there is responsibility taken when, you know, there is a reason why we engage with it. The equity, fairness, and inclusivity issue, we know about the bias. We know that, you know, these algorithms can't help that they are biased. They are trained on data, on human data, and humans are biased animals. We all have
Hello.
prejudices. We
How
all
are you?
have all kinds
Yes,
of
you want to come and
stereotypes, and so on. Then there is
want to
the
come
issue of agency and autonomy,
it's okay.
which is really important to have the human control, security and
No.
robustness.
Professor Beatrice Ifomadipo.
All right.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It's
Okay.
just,
Yes,
it will be
I'm
taken care.
hearing you. Yeah. I'm hearing you,
Okay.
please.
Okay, so I'm going to continue. Okay. The security and robustness issues, where robustness has to do with the accuracy. So robustness is, for instance, a big issue in terms of generative AI. Data privacy and protection, transparency, explainability, responsibility, and
We are
accountability.
hearing you.
Okay, thank you. Awareness and literacy, and then the issues of environmental harm. And this is something that's often downplayed, and we can also discuss for a whole day why that is the case. But there, in general, there's environmental harm, but specifically in terms of generative AI, there is harm in terms of the huge amounts of energy needed to drive these systems, and also the fresh water that is needed to cool down these systems. So if we look to specific concerns in terms of generative AI, we have the legal concerns, and we're all aware of these. I'm sure you have discussed the property, the intellectual property rights issues, the copyright issues, and so on. There's, of course, the equity, fairness, and inclusivity issues, the agency and autonomy, and this specifically comes in also in the context of data and digital poverty, as I'll explain a little bit later. The security and the robustness in terms of the trustworthiness of responses. The privacy and protection is still there, the transparency, the responsibility, the awareness, and then the environmental harm. So there's a lot of overlap, but the focus moves a little bit and the emphasis moves a little bit when we get to generative AI. But you know all of this now. If I look at what you have discussed over the previous 7 weeks, so what I want to do is to move things a bit, to consider all of what you have done through a more political lens. So if we think of the AI business model, you know, this model is a lot has been written on surveillance capitalism from Zuboff onwards. What's his name? Oh man, I've forgotten his name, but the one of the most well-known logic-based AI logicians have also recently written an article for the ACM on how the discrepancies between surveillance capitalism as commodification of data for profit and the ACM values in their professional ethics code. But what I want to say to you is that commodification of data for profit is a byproduct. The main aim is the monopolization of power. It's about concentrating power at one end of the world and in the hands of a few big tech companies. So Kate Crawford writes in her book, The Atlas of AI, on why AI is a registry of power. And it has to do with the way in which classifications are made when data is collected. And Abeba Birhani explains to us that this is why AI is a discipline that is socially and politically loaded. It prioritizes and promotes the concentration of resources, tools, knowledge, and power in the hands of already powerful actors. So it's about a concentration of power. So in Africa, this business model is concretized as data or algorithmic colonization, as exclusion fed by intersectionality and digital poverty, and by certain geopolitical realities, such as that we have to be, it's possible in this world, this modern world in which we live, that basically, ghost workers in Africa that work in the reinforcement learning context to identify images, to screen generated text, and so on, that they are treated completely outside of international labor law. And that, I even heard someone say, yes, but at least they have a job. They are exploited. They live in really not fantastic circumstances. They are paid next to nothing. They are harmed because there's now this big case in Kenya where the reams and reams of pornographic material that these workers had to work through, left them in trauma. And it's not just the pornography, but it's also in some cases violent images. So this is how this business model plays out on the African continent. So algorithmic colonization is, just as in the historical colonization, based on a desire to dominate, to control, to influence social, political, and cultural discourse. But instead of physical land invasions, this comes as in the form of state-of-the-art algorithms and AI-driven solutions to social problems. So it is sold to us as, AI, here is the solution to food security in Africa. But in the process, we lose ownership of our data. And if you lose ownership of your data, you've lost your most precious commodity. I'll hear students saying ChatGPT is free. The general, the open public version, it's not free. You give it your data, you pay in what is most precious to you, and the students don't even realize this. So Abeba Birhani writes that algorithmic colonialism driven by profit maximization at any cost assumes that the human soul, behavior, and action is raw material free for the taking. Knowledge, authority, and power to sort, categorize, and order human activity rests with the technologists for whom we are merely data producing human natural resources. So, and I hear people talk like this, they can't wait to get their hands on Africa's data. And of course, we should not let that happen. It was already happening in many cases, but we can still get a hold of it. So what the concern is kind of a double concern. So on the one hand, these decisions on how to categorize our data is in the hands of technologists, of people that were not trained in the social sciences, that don't know necessarily what the moral and social consequences are of how they do the sorting. But apart from that, it is also done in a way that doesn't respect humans as humans in their full uniqueness. And this is the way in which we live our lives. We live in an algocracy. We live in the kind of society nowadays where all our behavior in some ways influenced or nudged by algorithms. And even those who are not connected, even those, if you think in terms of migrants, for instance, or refugees, they don't necessarily exist as data points on any data set. but then by definition, no resources will be allocated to them. So they're also influenced, even though they're not even connected. And if we say, we have to get their data, we have to give them a present so that at least they can be allocated something, then typically those kinds of vulnerable groups are not protected. There is nobody that protects their data. So we must also ask ourselves, do we want them to exist as data points? So these are all very, very complex issues that we have to think about when we think of AI. So then if we come to what I call the technopolitics of AI, because on the one hand, we shape our world in tandem with technology. Humans, everything that we have in some ways have come about in tandem with technology from the earliest of human civilization. But also now there is this political slant to this technology that we have to take into consideration. Coldry and Mejias coined the term data colonialism in 2019, and they describe it as an approach that combines the predatory extractive practices of historical colonialism with the abstract quantification methods of computing. So we have to therefore understand big data from our point of view in the world in terms of understanding capitalism's current dependence on this new type of appropriation, this new type of extraction, this new type of coming to take away our natural resources. And this appropriation works at every point in space where people or things are attached to today's infrastructures of connection. So it is everywhere. So global South citizens face then the possibility of their rights being disrespected, their humanity being ignored, their culture being erased in the race for geopolitical power that comes with the commodification of data in the context of AI technology. And why is it the geopolitical race? Why is it geostrategic? Why do I say we have to think about it in terms of politics? Because data is information, which is power. If there is a possibility to predict the behavior of people on a universal scale, then the person that can make those predictions have the power, or the entity that can make those predictions have the power. Data is power. Data is the currency of politics. So we have to understand this. We can never, ever think of AI as something neutral because of the way in which the access and the power that it brings is centered in the world, concentrated in the world in the north and in the hands of a few big tech companies. So if we now look specifically at the situation in Africa and the impact of digital poverty, it is driven obviously also by a lack of connectivity firstly. And in this context, I think we should very much fight for seeing connectivity as a basic human right. It is just as important for you to be connected as it is for you to have a safe place that you can call home. Because this is the way in which the world works now. You will be excluded from any kind of, whether it's in terms of the public service or whether it is in terms of access to healthcare or education, whatever it might be, if you are not connected. So this situation of digital poverty provides fertile ground for algorithmic colonization practices because people don't understand the importance of guarding their data. They're not even connected. They don't think of data as a commodity. They're not even aware that their data is a commodity and that people want to get it so that they can use it to feed their algorithms so that they can make predictions that will impact these people's lives. And it is also an important cause of Africa's exclusion from the AI production space. There is this rhetoric in the world today that Africans are only consumers of AI technology. We are not viewed as producers. And this is a rhetoric that suits the geopolitical picture and the drive to concentrate power in the hands of just a few entities. So we have to change that picture. We have to change the language. We have to make people aware of the deep learning endeavor. We have to make people aware of the technology, the AI technology that we do create on the African continent, because even people on this continent themselves think that we are doing nothing in terms of AI technology, which is completely not true. But in the case of generative AI, because we need these huge amounts of data and the massive computing power, by definition, we lose our agency, because by definition, we don't have access to those kinds of data sets on this continent yet, and we don't have the computing power, certainly not in any one country. But this does not mean that we are completely helpless. It means that we have to look to each other, that we have to remember the African Union agreements that we have in terms of data protection, that we have to enter into multilateral agreements with each other so that we can share data, so that we can share computing power, and so that we can work together on this continent. Then there is the other issue, which goes hand in hand with digital poverty, and that's the issue of data sovereignty. So data sovereignty is about the ownership of data. But what happens often, because we don't have the big data centers, and I hear that 177 data centers are going to open in Africa in the next decade, but most of them are in terms of some kind of agreement with the big five. So what happens is that African governments often turn to big tech companies or foreign investors such as China to help them fund the data centers. But then we can only speak of data localization, not data sovereignty, because in many of these cases, the data that are collected and processed at these centers don't belong to the country anymore. They belong to the big tech companies or to the foreign investors that fund the data center. So we have to be very, very vigilant, because also remember, if you look at World Economic Forum statistics, within the next few decades, almost half of the Earth's population will be African, and they will be young. So we have also a responsibility in terms of intergenerational justice to think about what kind of environment are we creating for our children? Do we want them to be slaves, digital slaves, or do we want them to be in control and to work according to their own business model? So, in terms of cultural similarity, this is just as concerning and something that we have to be very cognizant of. So, obviously, poorer economies have minimal or limited digital presence, and so they do not exist as data points and are not part of answers being generated by AI, by generative AI technology. So, this begins a slow but certain erasure of cultural diversity and an overall risk of data poor countries being colonized by the standards embedded in AI models. So we have to navigate this tension, and specifically with generative AI in education, the role of that the AI technologies might play in opening up and democratizing information and knowledge on the one hand, but on the other, the potential for reinforcing and entrenching existing inequalities at global and local levels, and in the process, erasing diversity. So it is essential for us to always, we can never relax. We always have to reflect on data provenance. Where does the data come from? Who owns the data? How is it collected? Who made the classification? Which company? Based on what? The social impact, obviously, of any implementation of AI-generated decisions or predictions. We have to consider human rights violations, and we have to consider the potential of such outcomes feeding inequality by cementing northern values and power. So there is a drive to keep the power relations in the world, the current world order, to keep it the same, and if possible, to increase the overbalance on the side of the North. And we have to be aware of that. We have to think about that because, is this what we want for our children? So lastly, then, if we think of language and knowledge, and we want to consider what is it, I always ask the students, how do you think about what is generated um, uh, by these generative AI applications, by ChatGPT? Is it knowledge? Surely it's not knowledge, because knowledge has been tested in some way. And if it is scholarly work, it has been peer reviewed. But what happens to generative AI is it is simply the outcome of probabilistic reasoning based on weights that are allocated and a computational network that is established by looking at mathematical relations between words and sentences and paragraphs. So there's no understanding of what is generated, and there's no testing or evaluation inherent in the process in terms of what is generated. And so if we think specifically of language, because of generative AI technology, we have lost our monopoly on language because algorithms can now create language. So our most core human social trait is the ability to wield sophisticated language as a tool to express and to shape our understanding of our world. But these technologies don't understand. They simply generate text. We instill the meaning into that text. We see meaning into that text. And in the way often, humans see faces in clouds. It is part of the human condition. We tend to anthropomorphize things. We see flowers having faces, that's just how we are. And this is something that people like Timnit Gebru and Emily Bender have warned over and over and over about. That we instill meaning into text that is actually meaningless, because that's part of what we do as humans, and that is something that this kind of technology thrives on. But now coming back to language, if you think in terms of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution of the 16 and 1700s, a huge factor, one of the main factors that caused or drove this scientific revolution and the Enlightenment was to break the hold that the church had on knowledge. So we know what happened to Copernicus, to Galileo. We know that if you dared to say anything that was different from how the church explained how the world works, there was dire consequences. So there was this drive for individual reasoning, for reasoning towards a hypothesis that was then empirically tested, so that there was evidence for knowledge claims. And where we are now in the fourth industrial revolution, having lost our monopoly on sophisticated language, we are facing the same kind of oppression from big tech companies. Why? Because in the end, these algorithms are trained on information on the internet. And what is on the internet partly is the fault of humans that put it there, but it's also in the control of the big tech companies. So in the end, if we start seeing text that is generated by models that are trained on the internet as knowledge, then we are saying that big tech companies have a monopoly on knowledge. And that is scary. So is it time for us to redo our retake of the role of reason and of the empirical method? One example that I'll give the example now, but so if we want to think then, and here are a few questions for you to think about, and we can discuss in the discussion time, how is it possible for us then to talk about building knowledge together with AI technology? How can we build knowledge together? And we can, but what we have to do is to evaluate what is generated to test it, to make sure that it's correct, that it's factually true, and then we incorporate it into our research and make it part of what it is that we are building, the research aim towards which we are moving. Students see it as the end of the knowledge process, where in fact it's the beginning. It is information that we need to do something with in order for it to become part of knowledge. So if we don't realize that, we have to ask ourselves, what would a worldview based on algorithmic processes, driven by autonomous probabilistic methods, rather than human understanding and reasoning, mean for the current world order? What long-term issues will potentially arise for the reliability of knowledge when future generative AI models are based on text that previous generative AI models have generated? So, so the inaccuracies are amplified. Will the very notion of scientific method and resulting knowledge change? Because if we start thinking of what is generated as knowledge, we're in trouble, because we've left out the whole testing part, the whole standardization, the whole peer review part, everything in terms of evaluating and validating the knowledge claims in different ways. And we have to ask, to whom would scientific knowledge belong? Certainly not to the researchers anymore, to the big tech companies. Who will control knowledge building? Who will decide what is knowledge and what isn't knowledge? Will we need another enlightenment and scientific revolution? So when I ask these kinds of questions, people always quote this example to me of how effective generative AI technology was specifically in terms of protein folding in biology. But if you look at this description of the research, part of the research happening at MIT, what we see is that what is most important to them is that they have a method using diffusion models to create and experimentally validate novel proteins. So generative AI can help with crafting and imagining new protein structures that are crucial for us when we think in terms of creating vaccines or discovering, manufacturing particular kinds of drugs. But we need to check whether that protein structure in fact is correct and meet certain requirements. And for that to happen means that we have to experimentally validate these protein structures that the generative AI algorithm comes up with. So it isn't as if the protein structures that are generated are taken. Okay, this is it. Okay, so we've solved the problem. No, we are responsible for people's lives. So it has to be tested before it can be allowed in as scientific knowledge. So if we then think in terms of the erosion of human cognition, we have to think very seriously that perhaps the fact that generative AI systems produce answers that sound correct and intelligent to us is the most dangerous threat to human agency, because we lose our agency in the process. If we simply lap that up as knowledge, we don't evaluate, we don't compare, we are not critical, we just simply lap it up, and we are being manipulated very often in terms of what is generated, specifically if you think in terms of chatbots. And it's also dangerous in terms of knowledge building, as I've said already. In terms of mental integrity, we have the right not to be manipulated. There is so much being done at the moment in terms of neurotechnologies, but AI technology in itself is a neurotechnology in that sense, because AI technology manipulates. Whether it's through echo chambers, whether it is now in terms of generative AI, in terms of chatbots that can read your reaction, that can adjust what it says back to you, that can even make it look, it takes on the image of a person that would be acceptable to you. we are being manipulated. And then we have lost also the fight against discrimination, because in the end, the bias that is rampant, the hate speech in the cesspool of what is in the internet, will just become totally out of control. So when we consider this kind of or these kinds of issues, we have to always keep in mind that why it is so important to think about this is also because, as I've said already, our world is co-shaped by us and our technology. Everything that we do from the beginning of time, and sometimes technology becomes embodied. If you think in terms of a blind person's cane, they don't see the cane as separate from their bodies. They see it as a part of their body, your glasses. You're not aware of your glasses every second that you wear them, but they enable you to navigate your world in some way. So in various ways, whether it's in terms of medicine, whether it's in terms of logistics, to get from one place to another, it doesn't matter what it is, but we navigate and tame our world and shape our world together with technology. But will we just allow any human into our lives and allow that human to shape our lives? If you think how deeply people think before they get into a relationship and how fast they get out. And, people say, well, I deserve better. And, they're very adamant. No, this is not for me. And I'm not going to live that kind of life. With AI technology, we invite it into our lives with open arms. Where's the critique? What are we thinking about? What is it that, where are our standards? Where are our rights, our agency that we feel so strongly about, having the right to do this, having the right to do that. But when it comes to AI technology, all of that evaporates. So we have to ask then, who is being given power over whom? Who is controlling who? And is human-centered AI still an option in a dystopian world where knowledge is controlled by big tech and based on dominant online worldviews? Can we even talk about human-centered anymore? What does human control even mean in this context? And so my invitation to you is to re-embrace the slogan of the Enlightenment, which was, have the courage to think for yourself. And this is something that we have to teach our children when they engage, when they use AI technology as a tool, because that's what it is. It's a tool. It's a tool that helps us navigate the world. It's nothing more. But it is not always viewed in that way. So last two slides, to think about, okay, what on earth are we going to do about all of this? So Abeba Birhani turns towards relational ethics as a counter, but she gives a very particular interpretation of relational ethics in this context of what she calls algorithmic colonization. So she says we have to reflect on historical injustices combined with the impact of AI systems on vulnerable communities. So we have to have a bottom-up look at things if we want to counter the business model of big tech companies. So in this sense, relational ethics is a framework that necessitates that we re-examine our underlying working assumptions, that compels us to interrogate hierarchical power asymmetries, and stimulates us to consider the broader, contingent, and interconnected background that algorithmic systems emerge from and are deployed to in the process of protecting the welfare of the most vulnerable. So we have to think about the world in which these algorithms come into being and the data which feeds these algorithms. Where does it come from? What is the world like from which we generate or we extract this data? Not good. The world is a mess. So we have to understand that we have to think about what will happen if all this whole big mess is put into algorithms that amplifies patterns. So the tech community, supported by AI ethicists for Abeba Birhani, have to zoom out and draw the bigger picture. We have to move away from asking how can we make a certain data set representative to examining what is the product or tool being used for, who will benefit and who will be harmed. So we have to look at it bottom up. It's not just about making a data set representative, because even in that action, there is bias, there is prejudice. Who is the classifier? Who decides? So we have to rather ask, from the point of view of the user, from the point of the view of the person that will be impacted by what is generated, will they be harmed? Who will it be that will be harmed, and who will benefit? And this then means that if we think in terms of an African AI business model, we have to unravel the impact of intersectionality. So this means we have to unpack how data classification is informed by interdependent systems of discrimination based on connections between social and political categorizations. Data is the currency of politics, remember? We have to focus on power relations driving classification practices. We have to ask who classifies, why do they classify in the way that they classify, what is their aim, who will be impacted. We have to find a counter, and Abeba Birhani offers a data justice approach. And from my point of view, this is something that would go a very long way, specifically on this continent. So data justice focus on how algorithms determine benefit or harm to communities that are impacted by AI-driven decisions and predictions through their classification mechanisms, rather than just focusing on the outcome. So it is important to think about how will you implement the outcome? Will you even act on the outcome? But if companies pay millions of dollars for an outcome to be, or a prediction to be made by an AI system, they're going to act on it. Okay, they're not going to say, oh no, sorry, oh oops, we forgot about this vulnerable group. This is not how the world works. So we have to, from the beginning, ask, how will the data community, whose data we are using to feed this algorithm, benefit or be harmed by the system that is going to be created? And that should drive our decisions about whether to create the system in the first place. So in terms of the way forward, if we consider the question of who decides how to classify data, it reminded me of Satya Mohanty's warning that interpreting the world accurately requires knowing what it would take to change it. And that is what Birhani is actually asking for in the way in which he positions relational ethics. We need to understand where we are, and we need to understand who will be impacted, and how we can build resilience against impacts, and how we can turn harm into benefit. So for that, we need a bottom-up relational data justice approach, which is focused on identifying the relationships of power and privilege that sustains injustice, and that upholds the current AI business model, and which we see playing out at data community level. And we have to then aim to use this knowledge to upset the business model driving data colonialism and AI technology from the north. So this means that we have to understand the ethics of AI as a politics of AI. And we have to realize the double danger of technopolitics. Firstly, that it is technologists that wield this weapon, if we want to think of it in those terms, and that in the end, the concerns are firstly political in nature, because it is about concentration of power. And we have then to understand that also generative AI is a political as much as an information tool. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Emma. I think of Emma as a quintessential AI ethicist and philosopher queen par excellence. So that said, I would like us to take a brief moment or seconds to give her an electronic round of applause. I'm not going to try to summarize or do a synopsis of all that she has said. She's touched on very pertinent issues, but I'm just going to highlight a few ones. The first is the downplayed part of the impact of AI on the environment. The second borders on the politics, the technopolitics, the algorithmic colonization that is ongoing. The way we or our leaders are culprits in this sense, maybe by not being discerning enough, and also the activities of big techs. You know, many things they present to us are not actually free. That's part of what she highlighted. It is not altruistic that they want to give certain things. It's actually borders on what they tend to gain, which is our data. And with that, she emphasized that data is information, which is power. Data is the currency of politics. And connectivity should be a basic human right, so as to be able to combat the digital poverty that participants have also highlighted in the comment section. So that said, I would like us to go into the Q&A comment section. You know the way we do it already. We just raise our hands, and in clusters, we take questions, clustered of 3. We have her respond, then we'll take another if there are more, and that's it. Thank you very much. So I can see a few hands up already, and I'm going to take 3 and move on. So I call on Flavius. Flavius, your hand is up. Kindly unmute, and please, to manage our time, go straight to the question or the comment so that we can give as many persons as possible the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ellen, and Professor. Thank you for such a rich presentation. Am I audible enough?
Yes,
yes, you are.
Just a quick one. Actually, these presentations got me thinking. Talking about data localization and data sovereignty in Africa and data poverty. Are we really data poor in Africa? If yes, why do the big techs come around to harvest our data? And what is the African Union doing in terms of digital literacy and data readiness for Africa, particularly, and what do we really do? How do we intersect the academia, the policymakers, the politicians in Africa to be sure we are all on the same page? Because based on your presentation, I can see we are racing against time. If we must ensure sustainability and preserve the cultural heritage of Africa in terms of intellectual property, in terms of our unique identity, we need this collaboration and we need it now. How do we do that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll take 3, then we have you respond, Emma. Daniel Abasi.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Emma. My own question is on the issue of operation of the church. I didn't quite understand it. How does the church come in here? If it is a disadvantage, what should the church do? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll call Nafi Yaya. Please unmute.
Yes. Hey, good evening, Prof. Thanks for the lectures. My own is not a question, neither contributions, but I would like to Prof to give me a little time when it's come to the conclusion to recommend these sessions. Thank you.
Okay, so Emma, could you please take those 3? Then we'll take some more.
Thank you. So first, Flavius, I think we are rich in terms of our data if we keep it for ourselves. But when we talk of data poverty, what we are talking about is the fact that we don't have digital profiles. We don't exist. There are not enough Africans that exist as data points. And if you think of our internet profiles, for instance, there are so many people that are still don't have electricity, that are not connected, that their data is not yet part of the digital world. They don't exist in the digital world. So in that sense, we talk about data poverty, but it is precisely because we are so rich in data that they are flocking to us, and that they want to yes, we will help you. And people say, oh, it's so wonderful, Amazon is coming to Kenya, and it's fantastic. Meta is building a satellite in Johannesburg. Under what conditions? What are the agreements that were made for that? And I can tell you that the African Union has a lot in place, but we have to kind of become aware again and re-energize some of the agreements that exist already and the policies that the African Union has. They are two very important. There's a data framework, and there's also a data protection policy that the African Union has, and I'm happy to send those to Titilolo if you want to share with them. I can send it to you, and also give you the links where you can find it. So it's not as if we don't have anything in place, but it is also about the implementation. And it is also about the awareness that we actually have these policies. There's now an African continental AI strategy that is on the table. But I also don't know if people are even aware of that, which is also something that I can share with you if you would like to have an eye on it. Yeah, okay. I think those are, I hope I've covered Flavius's questions. Titilona, you must tell me if I missed anything. Then moving to Daniel, what I was referring to is the Middle Ages and the power of the Catholic Church in terms of silencing scientists, in terms of, if you think of Copernicus and Galileo, and also in terms of medical science, work that was done, people that were, in the end, sentenced to death because they dared to say that what the church was teaching, that the earth is flat, is in fact scientifically not true, and they had the empirical proof for that, but that was not allowed. It wasn't allowed to so the church also had a monopoly on scientific knowledge. This started changing with the printing press, and so very much if you think in terms of generative AI now, but we have to ask ourselves, so it's not a remark against religion or a remark against the church. It's simply as an example of how the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution came about in the Middle Ages, and asking whether we are not in the same situation again, that we are being oppressed in terms of what we are told knowledge is and how knowledge is generated by a handful of people. And what happens then to academic freedom, what happens to scientific knowledge, and what happens to the whole knowledge project, in fact, if it is just a handful of people that control what we call knowledge. Then the last question, it was a comment, but I'm not sure that I really understood Nafiu's comment, Titilola.
Prof,
okay.
I would like to conclusively mention that digitally, geographically, technologically, and scientifically, to appreciate your kind effort for giving us this kind of opportunity to acquire the knowledge on AI and many more. So I really appreciate your kind effort for the lectures and giving us a kind of knowledge that will be useful in the academic and professional environment. So we really appreciate your kind effort, Prof. Thank you so much. I remain Comrade Dr. Nafiu Yahaya from Federal University Duse College of Medicine, Faculty of Medical Science.
Thank you very much, my comrade. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing more hands up if there are, but before okay, no more hands from my end.
My hand is up, Tokumbo Ayola.
Okay, so we'll take Tokumbo Ayola at this point.
Can you
unmute and ask your question, please?
Yes. Thank you, Prof. It seems to me that the elephant in the room is actually the economy of Africa. Most of our economies are still neo-colonial dependent economies. We are not manufacturing anything. We are not producing anything. Don't you think that should be the starting point? Because we are not producing anything. We are dependent for technology, economy, even culturally, even politically. So don't you think we should start from there? First of all, put our house in order economically. We are not even trading among ourselves. The level of trade is just about between 1% and 2%. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. Is there another question, Titilola, or can I answer?
You can answer, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. Yes, I like very much how you describe it. And yes, but you know what also happens is we start believing the rhetoric that comes from the north, because we do produce the AI technology in Africa. If you go and look at, I will give South African examples. I always try to promote my colleagues' work, but if you go and look at the work that Lelapa AI or Masikane natural language processing do in terms of developing natural language processing technology for indigenous languages. That's new technology that is being created on this continent. We have in terms of generating medicine, for instance, and using AI in healthcare, there is a big project at Makerere University with Sunbird, which is a private company, and funding from Canada that works on AI in healthcare in maternal and reproductive health issues. So those are just a few examples. There's a big zipline example, the Rwandan zipline company that now has unicorn status, which used AI to predict the weather and to transport blood and samples from pregnant women to hospitals faster and saved a lot of lives in the process. We do, but I agree with you on the whole. On the whole, economics is the problem. The economy is the problem. And also, then immediately, I'll give you again from within South Africa, when we talk, we now have a policy framework, an AI policy framework that came out about 2 weeks ago. It's open for discussion until I think the 19th of September or something like that. And what the focus is to position ourselves as a global role player in terms of the digital economy. And of course, we want to do that because we want to fix our economic position, but we can't fix it. It's like building a house on sand. We need to look at what the issues are. We need to look at how we can make ourselves independent, how we can use what we have. And so, everything that we do, we have to be a global role player. We have to think of the global, but we must try and reduce our dependency on what happens in the rest of the world. And we can. We have more data than the rest of the world combined. And we must embrace that power that we have and use it wisely and not give it away for free, because this is basically our last chance. So I really think that this is very serious, and I don't want to overemphasize this. So I really think that we should be proud of what we already have, and we should also become aware of it so that we can also give counterexamples if people from the north say there's nothing happening here. There is a lot happening. People are working very hard. I think of my colleagues working in the deep learning in Indaba. They work day and night to train data scientists across the African continent, and they're not being paid for it. So, there is a lot of people that are working very hard, but there's always the odds. And we just have to, we have to be aware and support, I think, as far as possible. Thank you.
With that, we're bringing this call to a close. Once again, Professor Emma, we really appreciate your presence, the lecture you've given. It's quite deep and dense. It's very thought-provoking. I'm sure I will have a lot my mind has a lot to chew on as the week go by. So thank you once again, our dear participants. On Friday is another is the closing session for this week. Please make it a date. The time is 4 p.m. this time, not 2. This is just a unique one. So, bye everyone.